listening to the ACT podcast. You better like my daddy's show, you creeps.
All right, welcome to the ACT podcast. I am your host, Anthony Christian Tafoya, joined with my old friend. We just recently came across each other again. His name is Tom Lord. It's gonna die. It'll just crash. But Tom, I don't want to say what you're an expertise in because I feel like I'll mess it up. So I'll let you explain what you're an expertise in and kind of give the audience a general idea of what you have done.
Yeah, expertise is a rough word, and we all know that there are too many people who consider themselves experts, right? I'm a fuck up, so we can just get that out of the way. But my background is in international relations, specifically on counterterrorism, conflict and counterterrorism.
Yeah.
So armchair general shit. I have no military service background or anything like that. But I got my master's degree in international security studies from Boston University. During that time, I worked in, refugee resettlement for the Boston Consortium on Arab Region Studies. So we were working in UNHCR camps, specifically with Syrians. There were a lot of people, this is circa 2016, who were calling themselves refugees, but they were coming from countries that weren't at war. Pakistan, etc., or countries whose war had long fizzled out and they weren't really displaced by it. Afghanistan, there are a lot of Afghans, but then a lot of Moroccans and Algerians and people who are not from conflict zones. So we would just focus on the Syrians at refugee camps, arrival camps in the EU. And I don't know if you know how asylum works. I'm sure you do, but the way it was designed in the 1970s under the United Nations High Council on Refugees is that if you are displaced by conflict, famine, whatever, they don't mention economic crises, but environmental disasters, famine, conflict, you are to seek, or you're politically persecuted in your country of origin, you're to seek refuge in the country of nearest safety. So for people fleeing Syria, that would have been Turkey or Lebanon, right? But they get to Turkey, common pathway, and they'll end up in a town like Izmir, which is within sight from its beach of the nearest Greek island of Chios. So in the middle of the night, some Turkish smuggler will put together a dinghy with an outboard motor on it, load up 30 of these migrants, and launch it towards that island of Chios, because as soon as they hit that, they're technically in the European Union. And now they begin their asylum-seeking process there. And none of them want to stay in Greece, because they all understand that the Greek economy is shit, and Greeks can't get jobs, and it's fucking, it's dysfunctional and fucked. So they all land in Greece, which is the EU, but then, Schengen, the Schengen zone, the free travel zone and all that, they all want to go to Germany and Sweden. That's where the jobs are. That's where the quality of life is better and all that. So I worked in that in Greece and Turkey, and then I followed up with these gentlemen, in their countries of destination, Germany. German's my second language. So I've done a lot of refugee work, and then my personal expertise is on terrorism. A lot of people in my field, when I got into it in 2015, I've been doing this independent research since 2012 on the far left and the far right. But when I became a graduate student in 2015, most people who were in terrorism were, a bunch of white boys like myself who were focusing on the ISIS thing, the jihadi terrorism. And what bothered me about that is none of them had read the Quran or spoke Arabic or had been to any of these countries. And I know a lot of people who were like, well, you don't have to have been to Syria to write effectively about it or intelligently about it. And I disagree. I like the quality.
Dave Smith told me that.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
But keep going. I'm sorry.
No.
He said you don't have to be there.
Right.
He made an entire meme out of it.
Did he actually?
You haven't been?
Did he actually say that?
Yes, 100%.
Is this what Piers Morgan said to him or something like that?
It was Douglas Murray.
Oh, that's right.
On the Joe Rogan podcast.
I remember.
Said, "Oh, you haven't been," and he goes, "No, I haven't been there." I think that was the closest Dave's ever come to telling a joke.
Right, and Murray was talking about Israel, right? And he was kind of shilling for the pro-Israel position, and he's like, "Well, I've spent a lot of time in Jerusalem or whatever." Yeah.
And Dave said, I don't have to have been there.
Right.
So you're disagreeing with Dave, though. Because Dave's a big expert.
Look, again,
No,
Dave Smith strikes me as like a overly enthusiastic college undergraduate who's just read a bunch of Noam Chomsky and might be piggybacking off of his dad's New York Times subscription or whatever and reading that in the mornings. And that, that's fine. And there are a lot of people in my field who write about places they've never been to. And they do so quite well because they kind of understand the dynamics and what's going on there. And they do so without making broad forecasts or whatever, but, have original analysis. Personally, I just don't feel competent to start writing about, let's say, another border conflict breaks out between Thailand and Cambodia. Well, I'm not going to write about that. I don't know jack shit about Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
My wheelhouse is the far left and the far right. So on the left and post-left, anarchists, revolutionary communists, and then on the right, neo-fascists and Nazis.
Yeah.
And this is what I focus on. But, I guess I have been adjacent to just terrorism studies, all-encompassing terrorism studies and that sort of thing. So,
would you consider? I have a real grudge against Dave Smith. Would you consider Dave Smith a terrorist of the mind?
I haven't watched.
Is actively making people retarded consider terrorism?
It's a grift. It might be. I haven't seen enough of the guy's stand up to say. It's like you said in a previous episode. I've never seen the guy crack a joke except for maybe that one against Murray.
I think you just cracked more jokes than I've seen Dave Smith.
Yeah, which is say none. But having not seen his stand up, it just seems like he's a guy who failed in his craft, and now he's making money by talking about shit that he's not.
I have heard rumor he's good, but I have no proof of this.
Good. What exactly?
At being a comedian.
Okay, all right.
I feel like I used to hear him on Bob and Tom in the morning. If anybody knows what Bob and Tom is, old radio show that was broadcast out of Indianapolis. I feel like he might have been on there, but I'm not positive.
Was it kind of like a Opie and Anthony sort of format?
Yeah, but it was cleaner. It was, they got kind of dirty, but not really. It was kind of full of innuendo and stuff like that.
The whole like non-committal libertarian thing, I know what the libertarian left is. A lot of them are anarchists, or anti-civilizational, and the libertarian right is clear to me. I mean, a lot of them kind of seem to be like pedos. You'll talk to the libertarian right, and they'll talk to you about crypto and open markets and laissez-faire economy and all this, and then they'll grossly just insert, also, we need to fix the age of consent. You're like, what the fuck? So there's that. Dave Smith is kind of what, it's like very boomer politics, like a Ron Paul. I don't know if he's how he personally feels about Ron Paul, but it just reminds me of like these politically wayward individuals that I met in undergrad at ASU, like around 2008. Again, Ron Paul was a big deal doing campus tours and things like that. And his politics seem a little dated, but I haven't heard him explain what his worldview is through the libertarian lens to know enough about Dave Smith. I just know that he has, again,
he doesn't seem to pay attention much, because he voted for Trump. Now he says he regrets that because he says that Trump ran on an isolationist platform, which I don't think he ever did. I listened to Trump. I never heard any kind of isolationism.
A talking point in all the rallies was, I'm going to get us out of these endless wars in the Middle East. So he said that quite a bit. He never said he was exactly isolationist. So this is interesting.
Keep the mic up to your mouth.
Oh, yeah. This is interesting. And so just my final note on Dave Smith. He seems like someone to me who, read a lot of Chomsky and Howard Zinn and all of that and just has an axe to grind with the American machine. And that's where I stand, on him. But what did you just brought up?
About Trump being an isolationist.
Oh, right. So Dave Smith, though, is not alone in that opinion. I
know a lot of people have it.
Yeah, there's a huge MAGA base that are upset with him because they think he ran on a purely exclusive platform. Well, they weren't paying attention.
Thank you.
They weren't paying attention. and he regularly,
Wait, because I'm a dummy, and I want to make sure that this is how I see it. Tell me if this is a dumb way for me to see it.
Okay.
One, he was the president for 4 years,
Mm-hmm.
and he certainly was not isolationist.
No.
One of his biggest things was the Abraham Accords.
Right.
He was, and everything he seemed to do was to put America back in a better economic, positioning in the world,
Mm-hmm.
and to make sure that we were truly the superpower.
Right.
Not just kind of like the faux superpower that was getting used and ripped off and all this other stuff, right?
Right.
So when you're a superpower, you can't actually be isolationist anyway, like in theory. That's how I see it. Now, am I dumb in seeing it that way?
No, I think so. Here's all right. So a really good example, and I'm going to throughout this podcast mention Nick Fuentes and the Groyper crowd because they're an interesting piece of what could be considered Trump's base, even though they regularly talk shit about the MAGA crowd and Trump himself.
Right.
But so when we decapitated Maduro, when we arrested Maduro, when we went into Caracas, Venezuela, and we took down that regime, a lot of people were looking at this like Groyper crowd or the America First crowd, I'll call them, who themselves can be disaggregated in different parts, and they're looking to them, and they were looking for a reaction. Like, are they going to consider this to be interventionism where they had wanted an isolationist platform? Well, no, they cheered it on, and they said the Don Roe doctrine is absolutely appropriate. South America is our backyard. Fuck off. China would do the exact same in the case of Taiwan or whatever. And Venezuela has been a thorn in our sides, just like Cuba has been a thorn in our sides. And there were like 7 countries in South America in the early 2000s that were called the Bolivarian states. and
My cat is petting Tom.
The Bolivarian countries were these socialist regimes throughout South America. Nestor Kirchner in Argentina, Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, Lula da Silva, the current president of Brazil, was one of these. And then he got arrested for fucking serious corruption, and now they voted him back in after having had Jair Bolsonaro. So these are called the Bolivarian countries, and they're all these socialist South American states, and they regularly rebuff America at the Summit of Americas, an annual thing that we have in our hemisphere. So Venezuela, like Cuba, has pissed us off for a while, and it wasn't surprising when Trump went in there. And also, a lot of the America First crowd cheered it on. Again, thinking this is our backyard, and we have every right to flex our muscle here, more so than we do in Asia or elsewhere. So that wasn't a surprising move. As far as Iran, which we'll probably get into the weeds on, but I keep saying that Trump has been tweeting and talking about Iran since at least 2015, when Obama signed the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan on Action.
I could say he's talked about it longer than that.
Since 1980s,
Yeah.
I found out. He was writing about it. He was writing about it in his first book in the 1980s. And
he did interviews with it because Carter left all the hostages.
Right. Yeah.
So he's had an axe to grind with Iran for a long time.
Which I did not realize, and I didn't realize he was so plugged into this. But you're right. Like, he considered it a national humiliation, and the idea of a religious Muslim theocracy, running Persia has always been repugnant to him. And
wow. Me too. No, but
well, I mean, anyone who was surprised by this, you can give them the "Fell for It Again" award, I guess. But he wasn't even very surreptitious. Like, Trump has signaled that he was going to do this for a long time. You mentioned the Abraham Accords. He also recognized the Golan Heights in Syria as Israeli territory officially. They called it the Trump Heights.
He's always been very pro-Israel.
Very pro-Israel. Yep.
His entire life.
Yeah.
So it is weird to me when I see people like Dave Smith or Tucker or Candace or whoever you want to talk about, whoever is big in the media right now, almost feeling like they're duped. And I feel like they're the dummy.
They just weren't paying attention.
Yeah, they weren't paying attention. And of course he's not going to campaign on war.
No.
What presidential campaign is going to start with, well, guess what, guys? I think we should go and bomb the shit out of Iran.
But the signs were all there. You know, his emphasis on rebuilding the military, his appointment of Pete Hegseth as Secretary of War, renaming the Department of Defense the Department of War. You know what I mean? I mean, these are all very clear signals. These assholes just weren't paying attention.
Okay, so do you think that if he would have won consecutive terms, he would have done the same thing? Because I feel like he would have.
Yeah, I think that. So a lot of the timeline that is for action in the current war was incumbent upon Bibi Netanyahu of Israel's relationship on whoever's in the White House, and the Biden administration had a very similar relationship with Israel that the Obama administration did, which is to kind of give it the cold shoulders. Now, all of these Democrats have big AIPAC donors and, you know, are somewhat like all politicians in high levels in the pocket of the lobby, a big one being AIPAC, have to toe the line, recognize Israel as this bastion of liberal democracy in the Middle East, a land full of dictators and terrorists and non-state actors and all kinds of nasties. You know, and Israel's this democratic oasis, this Western oasis, this periphery of the West. And so they have to toe that line, but also it's really important for the Democrat base that they recognize the struggle of Palestine, that they limit settlements in the West Bank, you know, that they condemn this war in Gaza while also recognizing that the October 7th massacre was a terrible thing. So the Democrats tried to toe that line. Yeah, had Trump won consecutive terms, I think Bibi would have calculated that it was time for strikes like he did, you know, just a few weeks ago. And we might have actually even been better positioned in 2020 for this kind of action, just because, you know, so you look at one of the main carrier groups that's participating in the Iran war right now. It's the USS Gerald Ford, which is approaching the longest deployment of any aircraft carrier group since the Vietnam War. They've been out at sea for about 11 months. They just went from Southcom, Venezuela, that action, and then steamed directly to the Persian Gulf. And they're operating there. And what they bring to the table is a variety of signals intelligence capabilities and shit like that. But we would have been in a better position in terms of morale, supply, resources, deployment time to have gone in and done this in 2020 rather than now or 2021. Yeah, I think he would have had the same policy, and I think that Bibi would have accelerated his timeline and Israel's timeline for action against Iran. They didn't have the relationship with the White House when Biden was there.
Yeah, well, I think so too, because everything about every first term presidential run is always a little restrained, right? I learned that the hard way. Yeah, when I was younger, I voted Democrat, and I learned that the hard way. That it was kind of moderate and nice for the first 4 years, and then it went hardcore stupid.
Yeah. Look at Obama's 2 terms. I mean,
that's precisely what I'm talking about.
Rather straight, and the last four years were characterized by drone strikes. You know, striking Yemeni weddings and shit like that, and killing civilians.
Yeah, killing race relations, all that kind of stuff. You know,
that domestically too.
Domestically was really bad.
One of the last hand grenades of the Obama administration, and I'm not weighing in on whether I think this is right or wrong, but it was clearly a political hand grenade. One of the last things the Obama administration did was weigh in rather heavily and put their finger on the scales of the trans bathroom issue, which I think at the time was raging in the state of North Carolina, but had broader implications for the rest of the United States. And, you know, they just kind of pulled the pin, tossed that one into the fucking room, and then walked out. And so that's how that went.
And thank God for Bruce Springsteen, because without Bruce Springsteen telling everyone that he wasn't going to tour North Carolina, I mean, I don't know how I could have survived without knowing that, you know, that Bruce wasn't going to do that.
How did the people of Lafayette survive?
I
without
hate
Bruce
fucking Bruce. I hate Bruce Springsteen. I don't understand him for a second. Do you? Do you understand Bruce Springsteen, the appeal, the love? anything about that fucking idiot?
There's a category of boomer celebrities, be it in Hollywood or in music, who they like, you know, they created a time capsule, right? Bruce Springsteen's Americana, New Jersey bullshit. It's, you know, I'm sorry, this is going to be this controversial thing I say on the pod, but New Jersey is a shit state that just it's a post-industrial. New Jersey is a post-industrial wasteland. Places like Trenton just produce these slug brains who have a ton of fucking lead and mercury in their blood and arsenic and shit. So fuck them. But yeah, I mean, Bruce Springsteen is like one of those artists who, like Joni Mitchell and all those other people who like started bitching, or Neil Young. They what they did for their time was important in that epic, and they captured that time, but it's like they didn't grow with the politics as the country continued to evolve. And so they just kind of seem obsolete to me. Like, I don't want to hear what the fuck they have to say about anything, be it Roger Waters, as we mentioned, or Bono. I mean, these people are just so detached.
Actually, the reason it's so funny you brought up the trans bathroom thing, because Bruce really did do that, and I actually just saw he's dedicating his new tour to no kings and a fight against fashion.
By the way, I saw that that's kicking off again, which it really fizzled out in October of last year. The No Kings thing. It was like it was going to be this, you know, huge countrywide demonstration. I heard it's kicking off again across the state of Arizona here. I have to imagine the rest of the country.
Yeah.
But yeah, there will be like a sad grouping of retirees outside of Flagstaff City Hall with their neon signs that, you know, are just saying bullshit, and they're kind of reliving their. The funny thing is, a lot of these folks of that generation who talk with nostalgia about the civil rights movements and the various protest movements of the late 1960s and early 1970s.
Yeah.
None of them participated in that. They were like going to college, or they weren't that active or whatever. So a lot of them are trying to relive that in this, you know, Trump. It seems like. So wait.
I want to stop you right there, because I noticed something else. Not to get like overly racial or anything. It's just one of those things that you stop and you go like, what? But the black community is usually obviously pretty Democrat and whatever. Mm-hmm. And to see hordes and hordes of black people screaming "No kings" when all they literally do is call everyone king and queen. Is one of those, what do you call it, cognitive dissonance?
Yeah.
Where you're like, what the fuck am I watching?
The crowd that I saw participate in the first No Kings, you had some college students, of course. The students are always going to be part of the mobilization. But then it was a lot of folks, like, you know, so I was driving down Gurley Street in Prescott on Whiskey Row, and I just saw this small grouping of like retirees, and they all had this like, Trump's a fascist, you know, these sort of signs. Maybe they're right about that. That's a different debate. But what they seemed to be doing, it seemed like they had all just watched too much Handmaid's Tale. You know what I'm saying? And shit like that. Like, and they kind of get off on this fantasy of being a part of a resistance. I mean, some of them, it's as if some of them wish he were more fascist than he was. And I saw this. This is really interesting. It's a terrible tragedy, and I'm not making light of it. But I saw the. And so I'm going to separate what I call liberals, center left, kind of go with the program, vote, all of that, from leftists, who I have a little more respect for. They're interesting, they're revolutionary, they're anti-parliamentary. They have some fascinating qualities to them. But the liberals, you know, these like Netflix Democrats had just like watched like too much of The Mandalorian or whatever. And so in Minnesota, when ICE is still deployed in Minnesota, but when they first shot Renee Good in the face, and then they shot Alex Pretty, the left like got horny. Like they got horny. They were like, oh, you see, these masked fascists are shooting us in the streets. It's like, well, that guy had a gun and got into a physical confrontation with armed federal agents. It's horrible what happened to him. I'm not saying that's right. You have the right to protest. I also believe in the Second Amendment. You have a right to, he had a concealed carry permit, all of that. But like the left, rather than being sad that he got killed, they got kind of horny because it like justified this like resistance culture or whatever, or made Trump, you know.
I like how you said that. That's good. They did get horny. Well, it's so crazy, right? Like, I don't know. You're right. Netflix liberals, they really have nothing better to do. I noticed that too. While they're sucking off our Social Security, they just go out and protest because they didn't do a fucking thing their entire lives.
No.
They bent the knee to the system. They fed into the system, and now they're like, oh, wow. Shit, I forgot. I was all against that when I was 20.
Yeah.
Now that I'm retired and have 14 bed Airbnbs, you know,
Right.
I can afford to be a little riskier with it.
Yeah. Now that all of my capital is sunk in a $500,000 house, I'm wealthy. I have no earthly concerns. I can throw together a neon sign and go stand in front of Flagstaff City Hall that says "resist" or whatever it might be.
Pathetic.
It's the Disneyfication of mass movements and protest movements. And look, there are very real and serious actors. The city of Portland burned for like 130 consecutive nights in 2020. Those cats, say what you want about them and their worldview, they were rather serious. They had improvised incendiary
At least
devices.
they were dedicated.
Hell, they had balls. They showed up and whatever. They showed up and they were committed to it, and a lot of them got arrested, and a lot of them seem to not be facing any charges because of the DA of that state or whatever.
Yeah, that's wild, man.
It is crazy. There's a gentleman in there's an anarchist I follow, an American anarchist that just got out of prison. I want to say in Louisville, Kentucky, maybe St. Louis, Missouri. One of those fucking, anyways, forgettable Midwestern, somewhat Southern towns. But he did a 10-year bid because he busted out some windows of like a development company office or something like that and chucked a Molotov in there. And I don't think it was a very good Molotov. It didn't do that much damage, but he did 10 years for that. A lot of these kids who were throwing some of the devices that were used during the Portland protests against the federal building, they would have these IIDs, improvised incendiary devices. So they would take like a gas canister. It would be like a 70-30 butane propane mix like you'd put into your camping stove.
Yeah.
And they'd tape a couple of those together, and then in the center of that, they'd put like a 12-ounce bottle full of fuel or accelerant, and then like a big firecracker. And they'd light that fucker and then pitch it at these officers or at the facade of the federal building. Well, that could fuck you up if it goes off near you. So, these people were rather serious, and I'm going off on a tangent now, but different crowd from what I would call the Disney or Netflix liberals, right? I mean, like actually committed anarchist revolutionaries who are, all about that direct action.
Okay, Tom. So getting into like the terrorism thing, which is you plug your website real quick.
Yeah. So in 2021, along with a Canadian terrorism analyst and a Turkish small arms light weapons analyst, I co-founded the website militantwire.com. We specifically focus on terrorism and what's called non-state actors.
Yeah.
So various militant groups. A great portion, I would say like 2/3 of our content is jihadi extremism, jihadi terrorism, a lot of ISIS stuff throughout Africa, the Sahel, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. But I focus on neo-Nazis, anarchists, communists, things like that. And then we'll get like the odd article about, I just wrote one about eco-extremists in Germany who had attacked the power grid in Berlin and put like some 45,000 people out of power. So we can get into that territory. But anyways, yeah, that's militantwire.com is the website. And I write under the nom de plume, the wannabe wonk.
Right.
I had to use a different name at a period in my career. And I've just stuck with it because that's how I built the reputation going on various podcasts like Popular Front and things like that. So.
Okay. Now, how would you describe terrorism for me? Because there's this new thing where we redefine words.
Yeah.
So how would you define terrorism?
So I like the old school pre 9/11 definition, which was furnished by old school 1980s scholars of terrorism, 70s, 80s scholars of terrorism like Martha Crenshaw, and at this time in the 70s and 80s, your main terrorist groups were like Palestinians who would hijack airplanes and then demand ransoms once they had hit the runway. You would have the IRA, Irish folks. A lot of
those ones are kind of interesting. Nobody
are.
talks about them a lot.
They are, and they might be making a comeback. I don't know. That whole landscape is weird. Sorry for interrupting you.
No, in Ireland, is Ireland really looking at that?
Yeah, there is a new IRA. And
I guess the country's not looking at it.
there are some militant groups that have formed in Northern Ireland, what some people might call occupied Ireland, British Ireland, UK Ireland. But yeah, so these old school pre 9/11 scholars would have defined terrorism as an act of violence that is meant to intimidate or persuade or coerce a population.
Okay.
And so,
Not typically described as just people calling whatever they want terrorism because they don't like it.
There's a new term now called stochastic terrorism, and this was born out of the
trans stuff.
It was born out of the 2016 really changed a lot of definitions of terrorism, as the right and the left in this country were calling one another terrorists, and you had various street level groups on either side. On the left, people will think of the movement Antifa. And we can talk about them, and they're complicated, and I don't think that they can be defined as an organization or a single group. They don't have top-down command. They don't have cellular structure. It's an idea that people act upon. And on the right, you would have street-level groups who got into some very serious fights and even acts of violence. There were shootings on either side. Members got shot. Members exchanged fire, macing, beatings. And that would be the Proud Boys and groups like that, or there's a neo-fascist group that was born out of... So another big event when talking about terrorism domestically and right and left violence would have been the Charlottesville event in 2017, August 2017. One of the groups that participated in that was a group called Vanguard America. It's a neo-fascist organization that was formed by a former Marine and an Iraq war veteran. And they were old school fascists a la Mussolini or Francisco Franco, not really Nazis. A lot of their members had very anti-Semitic views and were Nazi adjacent, but they were an old school fascist organization. Well, after in 2017, Heather Heyer, who was a left-wing activist, got hit and killed by a member who had been marching with Vanguard America, and he had a Vanguard America shield. It's emblazoned with like an eagle that's like carrying a fasces in its talons. And he hit and killed this woman with his Dodge Charger. He said he was fleeing leftists who were attacking him. They said he purposely drove his vehicle into the crowd as an act of vehicle-borne terrorism. He's now doing a life sentence. And so Vanguard America folded up, and its website and its finances and all of its administrative structure got hijacked by a young member of Vanguard America named Thomas Rousseau. Thomas Rousseau basically cut the former Marine, and he's a Texas kid. He has a beard. He's always wearing a cowboy hat, very like Western America chic fascism, cowboy fascism. So he started a group called Patriot Front, and they're now still active, and they have been accused by people on the right and left as being feds. But, they still do. They all march in white shirts and khakis and fucking big fascist flags and, all of that. And they do banner drops and these kind of, and sticker campaigns and things like. So you have groups on the right and the left do this. And now the right and the left are accusing one another of acts of terrorism. And I stick to a rather strict definition of terrorism, which is a deliberate act of violence that's meant to coerce, persuade, or intimidate a population.
Are countries generally considered terrorist groups?
No, but I would say that countries can sponsor terrorist organizations.
Okay, we know that. That's true. We definitely know that.
But us,
But technically being like calling out an entire government or state and saying they are a terrorist state. Is that...
So I'm sure we're talking about Iran here more specifically.
No, actually, I'm not.
Okay. Well, no, I think terrorism is one of the tools of statecraft as it's used by states. So in the case of Iran, let us say, and their use of... So the Iranians are, of course, ethnically Persian, and they are mostly Shia Muslim. I think of them as the Catholics of Muslims. That's not a perfect comparison, but we can use it for our purposes right now. And so Iran backs these ethnically Arab Shia organizations, Hezbollah being the most notable in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen. And I think it's a tool of statecraft. So Hezbollah, in terms of their operational profile, in 1994, they attacked a synagogue in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and they killed, I want to say, around 80 people. It was a really big event, maybe nearly 100 people with a huge bombing. The reason Iran used their Arab proxy Hezbollah, who has an operational profile in South America, particularly in this triangle of South America that's lawless between Paraguay, Uruguay, Brazil, and Argentina. And it's kind of a lawless zone, and Hezbollah funds a lot of its activities through narcotics trade, weapons trade, and other illicit activities. So Hezbollah has had a operational presence in South America for some time. Iran got pissed off at Argentina because of a nuclear sharing agreement they had. They were sharing advances in nuclear technology, mainly on the civilian front, but enrichment technology and things like that. And the Iranians accused the Argentines of having pulled out of the agreement. So that that synagogue, was targeted. Another incident in 2012, there was a bus in the port town of Bursa in Bulgaria on the Black Sea. It was carrying, I think, around 30 Israeli tourists. The bus was blown up by a couple of Lebanese nationals who were said to be working for Hezbollah. So Iran uses terrorism as a tool the same way that other regional powers might be said to use terrorist groups or non-state actors as a tool. I mean, the United States, for instance, I'm not saying they're a terrorist organization, but the United States arms the Kurds in the Middle East, as you know, and backs them. Sometimes we stab them in the back and fuck them over. But when it's
as you do,
when it's yeah, and that's complicated. But we use them when we need to. The Syrian Democratic Forces, the SDF in Syria, were largely a Kurdish force. We were arming them, providing close air support, until it became inconvenient and Turkey started bitching, who's the second largest army in NATO, and this NATO partner. We have Incirlik Air Base in Turkey. We can't piss the Turks off. They're geographically important. So we had to ease up on that. But, we arm non-state groups too, and adjacent to the SDF, the YPG and the YPJ, is a group that our State Department calls a terrorist organization, the PKK, or the Kurdistan Workers' Party. They're a revolutionary communist organization, a Kurdish nationalist organization, and a lot of American weapons have fallen into their hands, and not always used against ISIS or other desirable targets, but sometimes turned against the Turkish government and Turkish security forces. So, terrorism is a tool of statecraft. It's used where convenient. I'm not saying that all terrorist groups are on the leash of some sort of state. But
so when we're talking about terrorism now, are we just having dumb conversations around it? Because I hear terms buoyed about the United States is a terrorist organization and blah, 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 blah. And that seems like a very dumb conversation to me. That doesn't seem it's too surface level. It's using kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Exploitative terminology to produce clicks, maybe, or
it's a super
is that I'm always interested in the dialogue we're having about it as a people, right?
Right.
Because I feel like we're kind of stupid.
I would say that the conversation around terrorism has lost its sophistication and quality since 9/11, and it's only gotten worse as more people have entered the field, as things have become more politically polarized, and as people are just now, as you said, it's a very loaded term. So to throw about back and forth term, you guys are terrorists,
it's almost like racism, right? Like racism was thrown around so loosely that it basically has no meaning anymore. There's no definitional meaning of it.
I see both sides using the term, weaponizing the term. So
that's the word. Yeah, I was looking for weaponized. Yeah, weaponizing it.
Yeah, I see a lot of that. So for instance, our State Department just recently categorized 4 militant left-wing groups in Europe as terrorist organizations, broadly under the brush of Antifa. The groups that were named Antifa Ost, Antifa East in Germany, an actual Antifa movement, and I won't even call it a cell because that would suggest cellular structure, but it was a movement. It was about a dozen hardcore Antifa members, or anti-fascists. There's no such thing as being a member of Antifa, but hardcore anti-fascist leftists out of the university scene in Leipzig, Germany. There's a left-wing neighborhood in Leipzig called Kunnewitz, and there's a bunch of anarchist squats. They've squatted public buildings. They've taken them over. They're covered top to bottom in graffiti. They might manufacture Molotov cocktails there for street protests and shit. But Leipzig in East Germany also has a very big resurgent neo-fascist scene. There's a bunch of young Germans who, it's illegal in Germany to, for instance, display insignia of the Third Reich. So no swastikas, no SS bolts, none of that shit. You might be able to get away with an iron cross
No
or something
KISS
like that.
logo.
Right, but there are so there's this movement. There are these things throughout Europe and the United States called active clubs. They're basically boxing clubs. They're far right-wing boxing clubs and fight clubs, MMA clubs, and they train in mixed martial arts and shit like that. And they also do firearms training.
Is Conor McGregor part of any of that?
No, not to my knowledge. But where the hell was I going with this? Oh, yeah. So in Germany, Antifa East, they targeted these active clubs and some right-wing pubs, and with melee weapons like shit you could buy at a hardware store, hammers and such. They're actually called Die Hammerbande, or the Hammer Gang. And they got like ball-peen hammers and shit and beat the shit out of these young neo-fascists who were pretty outward about their political views. So that was one of the groups that was named by State Department, Antifa East. And then State Department went ham and named 3 other groups, 2 of which are Greek anarchist groups, not necessarily Antifa. Like, I'm talking hardcore underground militants that planted bombs outside of police stations and things like that. And Greece is a totally different landscape when it comes to the left and the right. And I won't get too into the weeds on that because that could be a whole different podcast. But so the State Department named these 4 groups, all Antifa, designated terrorist organizations. All under the brush of Antifa. And I would dispute the designation of at least 3 of those groups, 2 of which are now inactive and have been rolled up by local police forces in their country of origin. Now, the left regularly accuses the right of terrorism, and the left will point out not so much organized terror groups, unless they're talking about Proud Boys or Patriot Front or one of those groups. But the left, as a part of their arsenal in labeling the right terrorists, they have a lot of lone wolf incidents, single individuals who went and, there was the Buffalo supermarket shooting. This guy was inspired by the neo-Nazi terrorist Brenton Tarrant, who had shot up 2 mosques and killed dozens of people in Christchurch, New Zealand. This dude was inspired by the manifesto and actions of Brenton Tarrant. The manifesto was called The Great Replacement. And so this young man, Brandon, went and shot up a black supermarket in Buffalo, New York.
This was just like 2 years ago, right?
Yeah, that's right. It was very recent. Yeah. Shot up a supermarket in Buffalo, New York. You've had synagogue shootings. You've had acts of mass violence committed by individuals, lone wolf individuals who were exposed to and espouse Nazi ideology. So that's what the left has in their arsenal in labeling the right terrorists.
So
as well as January 6th.
So the right
Yeah, you have January 6th, and there are groups in January 6th. I mean, we could talk about the 3 Percenters, led by Stuart Rhodes.
Yeah.
I
don't really want to get
yeah, but so there are other organized groups.
Yeah.
Oath Keepers, excuse me, I said the 3 Percenters, but the Oath Keepers is led by Stuart Rhodes. The 3 Percenters, militias, and the right has had a militia culture going back to the 1970s and 1980s.
Yeah.
Always been a thing. It kind of went underground after the OKC bombing.
Yeah.
After Timothy McVeigh attacked the Oklahoma City bombing, a lot of those like far right-wing militias went underground. There was also the 1987 automatic firearms ban under the Reagan administration. So a lot of that, a lot of the right-wing militia culture comes out of gun shows in the United States. So you'd go to a gun show in the 80s, you'd get, some really crazy firepower that was available to Americans rather cheaply. And then in these gun shows, there would always be like a table that was selling like far right-wing and neo-Nazi and sovereign citizen literature. So I'm thinking of the Turner Diaries, Hunter, things like this. And so, yeah, the right has its militia culture. The left has its Antifa culture.
So with the right is the idea that they'll kind of stick together, and they're kind of okay being labeled a terrorist organization or whatever, right? Like these groups, they'll be together. They like being known as a group, right?
They have their divisions and disputes.
Well, I know, but like they're not gonna start turning into like lone wolves as we're seeing with the left, right? The left is not really an organized thing.
Both have had their incidents of lone wolf terror attacks. So there was before this was during the Biden administration, but a dude in his 50s had attacked an ICE facility with like a propane gas canister, Molotovs, and had a firearm, and he got shot and killed by federal agents. He was alone.
When was this?
I want to say it was. I would have to look it up, but it was within the last 4 years, so sometime around COVID and all.
This wasn't the guy who accidentally shot the immigrants.
No, that was a different one. But then some of these other attacks on ICE facilities. Some of these other attacks on ICE facilities, which are being prosecuted right now, the other ICE facility shooting in Texas, these were members of the John Brown Gun Club. John Brown is, of course, the famous American abolitionist who took over the Harper's Ferry Armory and tried to arm slaves in a slave uprising against slave masters, and it didn't fail. The slaves were like, fuck you, you go ahead and get shot by the federal government. We want no part of that smoke. So the John Brown Gun Club is an anti-fascist, left-wing movement with various regional militias of folks who are trans activists, Marxists, civil rights activists that are armed, and they believe, in armed self-defense, and have picked up the 2A and taken it in a left-wing direction. And some people who have been associated with JBC, John Brown Gun Club, have been accused of taking part in lone wolf or small cell attacks. So both sides, have people who.
If I'm an immigrant, I don't want that guy coming to my defense. that was one of my favorite stories. Was when that guy shot at the ICE facility and killed like 3 immigrants on accident. That was one of those ones where I was like, oh, that's just too good to even, like, I could never even write that. Yeah. I never even think that. No, please don't come to my rescue, sir.
Yeah, think about this. You get detained by ICE, and then as you're going through all of that hell, some terminally online activist shoots you in the ass cheek with an SKS. Yeah, it puts a 7.62 round in your ass cheek as you're going to court and sorting out your immigration status.
That's the worst. Talking about having a bad day.
Not fun.
But I'm sorry. That story just tickles me. But okay. So with the terrorist groups and stuff like that, are we seeing? We know that some of these guys are highly funded, right? And by private donors and things like that. But is the idea that you're seeing now that, we're just trying to stir the pot up enough that we do get more lone wolf people going out and trying to cause as much damage as possible? Or do you see actual groups starting to form? Like, oh, now's our time to come out of the shadows, things like that. How are you seeing it playing out in the next 5-10 years?
I think it's hard for a lot of these groups to find cohesion, and they've certainly flirted with it. So, 2020 was a very active year for black bloc anarchists, members of the Black Lives Matter movement, anti-fascists of various stripes, who were all coming together for a common cause. And same thing on the right, January 6th, all of that. And I think these groups... accelerationism is an important term, and both on the left and the right, you have individuals as well as groups who are trying to accelerate the decline of the country because they see within the power vacuum, the ensuing power vacuum of, let us say, a governmental collapse or inability to police the streets, or sort of the lowercase a anarchy we had in American cities during 2020, which the streets were being ran, you had the Chaz in Seattle, Washington, which was run, at first it was run by leftists, and then it quickly got overtaken by like armed drug dealers who like shot a 17-year-old kid and were just like bullying the leftists who had taken it over, and they were quickly like pushed out by these like local warlords. I mean, they were like local warlords who took over these anarchist zones, these autonomous zones, and so on. They flirted with that and the lawlessness. And the right, I think they were like, the funny thing about the J6 crowd is, I think it's like something like 60 or 70% of the people who got prosecuted for the January 6th riots had serious financial troubles. Like these were boomers who were not doing well.
Yeah.
They were unwell. And they really thought that they were going to drag Mike Pence out and like hang him from a fucking gallows. And yeah, I mean, I think they have flirted with some lawlessness, and what's kind of adding fuel to the fire. So I talk about spoil system democracies. My country of expertise is Greece. Greece is interesting because for 4 years, you'll have a right-wing government, a center-right-wing government. People get pissed off at how they're managing the economy or whatever, and then they vote in a far left-wing government like Syriza. These are actual Marxists. Well, the Marxists shit the bed and didn't do such a good job, so let's go back to the right. Every time a new administration gets elected, what they do is they come in and they wipe out the civil servants and appointees, and then they put their own people in place. So you'll have 4 years of one policy, and then a wrecking ball administration comes in, puts in brand new people, and the totally opposite policy. And it seesaws like this every fucking 4 years, and it's really a bipolar way to govern yourself.
Right.
America is becoming
That's what we were kind of doing.
America is very much becoming like that, and I look at like prosecutions for political violence. So all of the pardons in J6, some of them fucking people were harmless, like the dipshit shaman guy or the guy who carried the podium out or whatever. I mean, these are like fucking boomers who are just like, you know, like taking social media posts and putting shit on Instagram. Like, oh, I put my feet up on Nancy Pelosi's desk. Some of them are harmless and didn't deserve to do like 10-year bids or whatever they're sentenced to. But some of them were really seriously fucking crazy. I mean, we talked about Stuart Rhodes. They were stockpiling weapons just across the Potomac River in Arlington, Virginia, and communicating with one another and like actually preparing for a societal collapse. And so I think but they all got pardoned, and so there are no real consequences for this other than the 4 years they did in a DC jail. And on the left, as you know, left-wing DAs are pardoning people for setting cop cars on fire and shit like that, or giving them very, very light sentences for something that would have gotten you a 10-year bid just 15 years ago. And so yeah, there's definitely like political favoritism and like a spoils system democracy kind of thing going on where we're, like pardoning our own people, weaponizing our own people, and yeah.
Yeah. Is the KKK still a thing?
Yeah, it is. I don't know a lot about that organization, but I know it's still active.
They're not considered terrorist organization.
I would consider them a terrorist organization historically. There have been
but like
2
not
or 3
anymore,
iterations of. They started out as a classic terrorist organization that they were using violence to threaten and intimidate people and keep people from voting and keep people from, assuming whatever rights were accorded to them under the emancipation as they were working that out in the post-war South. But yeah, the KKK is still very active, still very alive, but they're so localized, and a lot of
where are they localized?
The deep South, United States. I mean, there's a KKK chapter in here in Kingman, Arizona. Very alive. There is. But there's also an NSM chapter in Kingman, Arizona, the National Socialist Movements, who are American neo-Nazis. That they are the successor. There was a fellow who had come back from World War II, having fought for the Allies, and he was a hardcore Nazi in the 1950s. His name was George Rocker, and he used to roll around in this thing called the hate bus. There was a bus with all these megaphones on it, and they would go to civil rights protests and just spew racial slurs out of these megaphones. So their successors, the National Socialist Movement, they're America's neo-Nazi party, and Nazis think of the KKK as being like low rent and kind of rednecky and stupid. And, most Nazis, their biggest axe to grind is with what they would call world Jewry, or Jewish folks. Yeah. They're anti-Semitic. And they see Black America as being a club with which this conspiratorial cabal of Jewish folks uses to beat white America. But they... like the neo-Nazis don't focus so much on Black America or other racial minorities. Their biggest paranoia is about Jewish folks, and that's what they're concerned with. So there is a hierarchy of far right-wing, hard right-wing, racist, militant movements, and the KKK sits somewhere like at the bottom in terms of reputation with a lot of those organizations.
Does the name Daniel Carver mean anything to you?
Sounds familiar.
Well, I suggest everybody look up Daniel Carver whenever you get a chance, and just tell me what you think about him, because He's my favorite Ku Klux Klan member. He used to be on Howard Stern all the time. And, Howard had a black co-host, so he would just call her the N-word most of the show.
My goodness.
I mean, it was obviously very funny. But I was just curious if you knew who he was or if he was still alive. Or if he's trying to... He was all against the Jewry stuff, right? Is it Jewry?
There's intersection there. There's intersection there. So I've had a professor who's well known in the terrorism world, quite well respected. She did a lot of work with the KKK as well as Southern Nazis. The KKK has a similarly low opinion of Semitic peoples, but are more focused on old school racial tensions that still exist within the South, which are primarily between Black America and White America.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, so I have some more questions for you. What do you think of somebody like Douglas Murray? Do you know Douglas Murray? I guess I should ask that first.
Yeah,
I mentioned him earlier. You seem to know him.
Yeah, I am familiar with his work, and I just I think he's a gatekeeper. I think he's a gatekeeper. You have this class of journalists and then scholars who work in my field.
Right. That's why I brought him up, because he fancies himself somewhat of a terrorist journalist, right?
Right. Yeah, conflict journalist. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Oh, and so, okay. Well, go on with your thoughts about him.
Well, I mean, I think he's a gatekeeper. These people found their way into big publications back in the day. The papers of record like the New York Times, etc., or working for organizations like CNN. There are a couple of anchors I'm thinking of, and they got in, and now they're the experts, and they're supposed to deliver the narrative well. Vice News, which I have a very low opinion of today, but in the early 2000s, they shattered that mold by taking people who didn't have journalism degrees, people who just were really intelligent and had the gumption to go to these places. I'm thinking of folks like Jake Hanrahan, Aris Rusinos, and they did great work on ISIS, and they did great work on anarchists, and they did great work on neo-Nazis and 3D gun printing and all this kind of stuff. And they were not J-school journalists who came out of these famous, the Cronkite school and shit like that. None of them went there. And now with YouTube, you have journalists on the left and the right. I'm trying to remember. Andrew Callahan, is he the one who did the Hunter Biden interview? He runs like Channel 5 News. And then on the right, he's a leftist.
I don't know.
Like kind of a Bernie bro leftist. And on the right, you have people like Tyler Oliver. Have you seen his or Nick Shirley? Have you seen the videos Nick Shirley's doing about like fraud in the Somali community and all of that?
I know him. Yeah, I know him.
So people are going out, whether in the conflict space or other space, and doing independent journalism without all of these credentials, and that pisses Douglas Murray off, because Douglas Murray's whole goddamn identity is built upon, being an elite journalist, and he's the one who's going to deliver the narrative to you. He's the one who's going to deliver the news, and that's going to be.
Is he not like Nick Shirley?
I have no opinion. I have no idea what his opinion of Nick Shirley is, but the Nick Shirleys of the world on the right and the Andrew Callagans of the world on the left have totally pulled the rug out from under these elitist journo types by just going out there with a microphone, a selfie stick, and doing journalistic work, conducting interviews, and doing field work.
I like Douglas, but I give him his credit, because he seems to be one of the few who still actually will go out onto the field, And he's not one of those guys who will just sit there on the sideline and get reported to and then make an opinion like he actually was there.
There's a famous bar in London, and I want to say it's called like the Frontline Club or something like that, but you have to be a conflict journalist in order to get in there.
Oh,
and
really?
It's just this like bar full of hard drinking Western journalists and Eastern journalists, who are like, all have severe untreated PTSD. They're all like totally fucked, shell-shocked, and they just drink away all the horrors that they've seen since like the Bosnian War.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's crazy. Well,
it's called the Frontline Club. But Dennis Murray is very much one of those Frontline Club, old boy, the English love hierarchies. Oh my gosh, they fucking love special clubs and hierarchies and exclusivity. It's a big part of their culture. Whereas an American, I just have this very cowboy mentality that, if you have the intelligence, the wit, preferably some language skills and some cultural knowledge, go out there in the field and just do your thing. Nothing. I have contempt for like the guarded journalist class and the guarded scholar class who hide behind the doors of the American Academy and keep just regular folks who are really intelligent from weighing in on issues.
Well, I don't mind people weighing in. I do see both sides of that coin, right? I want some gatekeeping, and I also want people to freely do whatever, right? Obviously, I'm doing it, but but like people, I don't know if everybody's self-aware enough to be responsible enough to be like their own journalist, right? You know
That's
what I mean?
true. Yeah, this is where you get into like some people should never have had access to Twitter or to like other things, you know what I mean? Because they're just shouting their bullshit into the void, and now everybody knows everything because we have everyone's a Dave Smith.
Yeah. Oh, well, no, actually, honestly, yeah, Dave Smith is kind of how I feel about it, right? And I don't think I'm any better than Dave Smith. And that's the problem. I don't think I'm any better than Dave Smith.
You acknowledge your limitations, and
I'm not some smart guy.
This forum, discussing pertinent issues between two just regular ass dudes who are wages.
Yeah.
These are conversations that are being had between regular people, and neither one of us have claimed to be an expert on anything.
Well, I think so it's kind of the Joe Roganism of things, right? He's just a normal guy, comedian who's super thoughtful and interesting. Well, not everybody's Joe Rogan, though, right? Like, not everybody's that curious of a cat. Not everybody is that. I guess you would say he's open, open-minded.
Yep.
And so everybody has kind of their own political agenda or agenda in general, whatever it is, and so when you start trying to get into his space in that way, I think that's a danger that I can see why somebody like Douglas Murray goes like, whoa, we gotta check the door here and see who we're letting in.
Right.
You also got to be able to kick out people that have just lost their fucking minds.
So we mentioned Nick Shirley, and if we're looking at the two sides, him as a two-sided coin. The one side, where one might give him a pat on the back and say, this is admirable, this, that, I think he's a Mormon kid. So having the balls to like go up to people's doors and have these conversations and stick a mic in their face is not easy. But
no, it's not.
He's also a dumb early 20-something-year-old kid without any education. Here's me being a gatekeeper, but his model is he goes up to one of these, let us say, child daycare centers in Minneapolis, or St. Paul, and he finds that not only are there no children there when there's supposed to be 30 enrolled there, but there's like a bunch of fucking like middle-aged men, with beards and like, what the fuck are you guys? What are you guys doing at a daycare center? You're not educators. You're not child care experts. So he exposes that, but then he'll tag on a price tag and be like, this company, $20.5 million in fraud. Well, how the fuck did he calculate that? It gets a little dangerous. YouTubers, don't use them as a news source, but it is interesting that people can get out there and expose things that were limited to, the cameras and the microphones of the Douglas Murrays of the world for a long time.
Yeah, it's just interesting to me because I think what you're doing is really interesting and cool and things like that, and what I'm doing is not. But it is something where it's like, we obviously don't need the legacy media, right? Maybe that's I'm trying to work this out in my head right now, but like maybe that's the issue, right? Is that we need to kind of keep a steady flow of people coming in, and not like you stay there till you're 100, right?
Right.
We've had that issue with the boomers.
Like Wolf Blitzer, you can go back to 1991 during the Gulf War, and he's on a rooftop in Baghdad, Iraq, literally pissing himself as U.S. F-15s and F-16s are carrying out sorties and dropping bombs. He's so far from harm, it's not even funny, but he sees a few explosions and wets himself. And now he is like the paternal anchor of CNN. Well, I can't fucking stand Wolf Blitzer, and most people probably can't. They,
yeah.
And that's how we feel. Yeah, you're right. The legacy media. It's funny that like regular ass working folks throughout the West, is not limited to the United States, but like have contempt for journalists in the journo class.
Yeah.
And this is not something I would attribute to Trump talking shit about the CNN camera crews during every single rally he has. I think that the American people have been pissed off and fed up with legacy media for a while. In fact, right now, NPR, at least the local KNAU station, is doing its annual fundraiser or biannual fundraiser or whatever, or excuse me, semi-annual fundraiser, and nobody is calling in, and nobody's giving them a goddamn dime.
Oh, no.
Now, you could say that the average American has been squeezed and doesn't have the disposable income anymore to throw to NPR, but a lot of Americans are just fucking sick to death of. So what NPR does is they do provide a useful overview of the news, the top of the hour and all that, but then afterwards it'll be something totally unrelatable, like now we're going to review the book of a throw together an interesting mix of, like, you know, minority or persecuted classes, and like we're going to talk about their book or whatever. Well, most people like are just trying to hear the goddamn news.
They don't need a political agenda.
Yeah. They, you know, like
Okay, so maybe we need things like CNN or whatever, but then like
they're terrible.
But I know, but like we fire Wolf Blitzer and maybe put somebody like you on, right? And then when
the issue is the format.
when you're comfortable enough to where you don't have to travel anymore to go into it, or you're not interested in traveling anymore to actually see the to get real journalism, then like, all right, Tom's out now. Now we're gonna bring in, you know, Nick Shirley or whoever, right? Like maybe it just needs we kind of need to cipher through it more.
The format that bothers me specifically with broadcast television news is they'll land on an issue, and then they'll bring on a panel of experts, maybe Joyce Karam from El Monitor, or maybe fucking somebody from Al Jazeera, maybe somebody from the New York Times, maybe somebody from the Wall Street Journal, so that they have somebody from the, quote, right there adding their opinions. And they just bang on about the same issue for 15, 20 minutes, and it gets boring. You know, they've chewed that piece of cud to the point where it's no longer appetizing. The format that I think most Americans crave is a itemized list of events. What's happening today? What's going on? Cover all of them. I mean, the BBC, for all of their issues, the World Service still does a good job of this.
Yeah.
You know, they'll roll through world events that are important and not like cursory or, you know, fucking interest pieces.
Well, okay, so I don't want anybody being confused. I'm not in favor of the legacy. What I'm saying is, like, we need reliable voices in the media that we can trust, and then when they're washed up, we need to get rid of them.
I actually think a good one.
But we also need, like, I like the idea of, I like having a diversity of opinion and things like that. And I absolutely agree with you. We talk everything to death and, you know, take everything like it's as serious as a heart attack when it's not. You know, things like that. It's almost like, to use a sports analogy, like what Stephen A. Smith has done with, or Skip Bayless has done with, like, sports media talk, right? All those legacy chapters, like anybody that's on ESPN, they have to touch on a LeBron topic. Every day for the last 20 years, you have to touch on a LeBron topic.
And how long has he been? He's retired, right?
No, he's not.
Okay.
He's not, but he's been playing for like 21 years now.
Right.
And it's like, is he the GOAT? Like, the fact that they're still touching on that, like, that's what the regular media does too, right? Like, was Trump wrong for Russia collusion? You know, they'll still bring it up. Stuff like that's just old hat. We've talked it to death. We don't need to talk it to death anymore. So, yeah, like you're saying, we need an itemized idea of what's going on for the day, and then drop it, right? But then maybe we as Americans need to just be more discerning in who we're listening to.
Yeah, so there's a good example of what I'm looking for in, like, a state or national media outlet. A lot of people don't know of Voice of America. It's a post-World War II organization that was publicly funded up until recently, up until Trump 2. They're pulling the funding from them, and VOA might fold up under the direction of Kari Lake. But VOA used to just give you in 15 minutes a rundown of everything that important that had happened within the last hour. And then they might talk a little bit in depth about another issue to fill up 30 minutes of air. But their journalists got really cunty. I mean, they got the derangement syndrome, and they started, they got away from the objective analysis and reporting, and they started injecting their opinions, which a great deal of the country just didn't want to fucking hear.
Yeah. Interesting. Now, real quick, you mentioned her. Oh, is it working for you?
Yeah, it's
Can you
fine.
hear me?
Sorry,
Okay.
I fucked it up.
Carrie Lake, kind of a retard, right?
I think she's an interesting character. The funny thing is, whether it's on the left of or the right, so like the right can't fucking stand Ilhan Omar, right? Can't stand her.
Also kind of a retard.
I think, yes, I would agree with that, but an interesting retard. Carrie Lake is also an interesting retard. The lady's crazy. She's absolutely crazy. She's not doing well.
Now, here's
She's
the
having a
question,
rough
Tom.
time.
I don't want to get you in trouble or hot water with your lady, but would you do Ilhan Omar? I would. Would you do Carrie Lake? I would. They both seem crazy enough.
The people, they say like during times of chaos that the freaks rise to the top.
Yeah.
And this is just such fertile ground, such a fertile substrate for the freaks of American society to rise to the top. Be it the one who's really impressed me with her recent turnaround is Marjorie Taylor Greene, but for most of her political career, she and the Lauren Boeberts and all these people are fucking crazy, but they're interesting. I don't have any animus towards them.
Yeah.
I don't have any animus towards AOC. I just think these people are interesting. Furthermore,
Lauren Boebert and AOC, both very doable.
the thing is that, and so my entire life I've always thought it was my civic duty to vote. And I still might believe that in terms of local ballot initiatives, things like that, though I still get fucked over at every turn. Nothing I vote for or against ever pans out.
Yeah.
But I'm coming around to the point where like I don't want to vote in national elections, not as a matter of protest or being obstinate or anything like that. I just don't think I have any fucking power. I don't think it fucking matters. So as far as these characters, be it Trump, be it AOC, be it Ilhan Omar, be it Steve Bannon, be it Alex Jones, like all these people who have entered the chat are fucking fascinating to me. I mean, if nothing else, and if you're a doomer and if you're like pessimistic and you can't make sense of the times we're in, or you feel anxiety about the flux or the breakdown of these national orders, these big world orders, be it the UN, the UN Security Council, be it NATO, be it any of these multilateral institutions, the boomers are freaking out because they're breaking down, and these have given them safety through the Cold War and then also the post-Cold War era. Most of us don't even believe in these institutions anymore, so these freaks are rising to the top. And they fascinate the shit out of me. I think they're interesting.
They are interesting.
Good or bad. I'm not, objectively, they just interest me. They're fascinating personalities that wouldn't have existed when things were stable in the late 90s and early 2000s.
Well, okay, but that's the danger, right? That's how we lose the country completely.
Well, it's not good.
Yeah. You don't want people blackpilling and becoming so nihilistic that they're like, I'm just not going to vote ever. I have no power, because then you will absolutely relinquish all power to somebody who's just a complete turd. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Maybe a hot turd like AOC. So I feel that, man, because I'm in kind of the same boat. It's like, there's nothing I can do about any of this stuff except for talk about it, maybe shine a light on it, whatever. It's between you and God to figure out your morality with things, right? Which I think there's a strong sense and duty in that, right? If you're a religious person, to call out immoral behavior, you have to go like door to door, stuff like that. But like with our public figures, if they're acting evil or doing evil, we should say that, right?
Yeah, right.
I don't know. Is that crazy?
So I think there's a way to a way to do it that doesn't discredit you. So like the Brogan sphere, the Rogan guys, everyone except for that fucking dipshit Tony Hinchcliffe, who I just cannot stand, who's really doubled down on his vote, and good for him actually. That's kind of the genuine thing to do, or the sincere thing to do, because Rogan and all these guys having these performative, regretful segments on their podcast. I can't believe ICE is being so harsh and intense. That's what you voted for. He said he was going to do that. He said he was forcefully going to deport.
He did not stutter about that at all.
No, he did not. He made no fucking bones about it. So to performatively, I guess, own it, or to performatively regret something like that. You've bought the ticket, take the ride. That's how I see it.
What annoys me about that?
I was not a. I'm sorry.
Just what annoys me about those people in particular is that they've been labeled as conservatives, and none of them were ever conservative.
Joe Rogan's a classic liberal.
Yeah, he's absolutely not conservative. Just because he voted for a Republican once in his entire fucking life.
Right.
Yeah, I was talking to you about this behind the scenes too. Even I've been hearing conservative voices like Piers Morgan, like, what the fuck?
Not a conservative.
Not a conservative at all. Not in the slightest. And then there's people like Carlson, who I think is just a borderline anarchist now.
Tucker Carlson is a Mayflower wasp. He is old stock English, Anglo-American. And he's trying to square the circle. So he obviously fell out with the Legacy crew and Fox and all that and got dismissed. And he is a person who deserves some credit in acknowledging the fact that he was like a big war hawk in 2003 and was really responsible for ginning up a lot of public opinion against Iraq. And he's acknowledged that and regretted it. Whether I think he's gone too far, swing back in the other direction, I don't know. But I do like, he has been very delicate about touching the Israel thing, and he's approached it from the perspective of a University of Chicago professor, John Mearsheimer. And John Mearsheimer was a co-author of a book on the Israel lobby. And John Mearsheimer, if you've ever spent any time in the American Academy and International Relations, you just know that if you want a decent job, there are certain things you don't do. You do not try to make a détente with Russia or speak positively about Russia. And you certainly don't criticize Israel. You just don't fucking do it. Well, Mearsheimer did, and that's because he had tenure, and it's kind of hard to oust somebody who's been in a university that long and has that, amount of capital inside his institution. So Carlson is, through an America First perspective, walking the fine line of asking, how much influence does this tiny little country the size of New Jersey have over our foreign policy, over our elected politicians, whether they're passing domestic anti-Semitism laws or whether they're lobbying for more war in the Middle East on behalf of Israel. And so Carlson is approaching that from that perspective, but he's trying not to step over the line in Nick Fuentes territory where he's just an outright anti-Semite.
Yeah, well, it's funny you mentioned Fuentes because I feel like Carlson has the same political game going, right?
They're similar.
Okay, so anyway, what I was saying about Carlson and Fuentes is that I think that they both are trying to overtake whatever the void is going to be when Trump leaves, right?
Yeah.
And they have a wildly different version of whatever that is going to look like.
Right, and the dummies, the people. I got to point this out. It was brilliantly pointed out on a Tim Dillon podcast. But Trump was recently at a rally in Kentucky, and all of the people there just looked so drained and sad. They were like people who had stayed at the party too long. You know what I'm saying? And it's like 3 in the morning, and they're fucked up, and now it's not fun anymore, and they need to go home. That's how these people who are still on the MAGA train without any reflection think that J.D. Vance is going to be the fucking successor of the movement. He is not. He is a construct of Peter Thiel and big tech and all of that.
Yeah.
So, as you said, folks like Fuentes, Carlson, lunatics like Candace Owens are kind of trying to fill that void with their own shit. They're trying to figure out their way. They're not doing all right. They're not okay.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think Candace is bad for society.
She's not all right.
She's one of those people that I feel like we have a moral obligation to call out just because she is a retard. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many things I could go into with her, with the contradictions from other people and things like. Oh my god, it's that's a headache all on its own. But you've got to wrap up and whatnot. So, what do you think the best lesson we should take right now in all of this, with the terrorism, with the politics going on, all this stuff?
I guess one thing that I wanted to get out. So people with the Iran conflict, these people who just are having a really rough time. But you hear various reasons. So we marched into this without a clear objective. I think that the Trump administration had whetted its appetite with Venezuela and didn't have a clear understanding of what action would look like, and totally ignored all the war games in which we end up losing to Iran, because the Iranians are fighting a different war than us. They're fighting an asymmetric war. They have asymmetric means. The Iranians, the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, just needs to survive while inflicting as much economic pain upon the United States as it can. It's the war of the flea. And so they're trying to drain us of resources. People, look at the amount of missiles and airstrikes that we fired at that country, and they're like, oh, we're absolutely smashing them. What we're doing is depleting our arsenal, and we're destroying a lot of buildings. But the Iranians are going to come out on the other side of this. They've been preparing it for at least 30, 40 years. And so you hear now people are trying to make sense of the objectives. Is it just to open up the Strait of Hormuz? Are we still seeking regime change? Well, the regime is deeply embedded down to the level of the non-commissioned officers.
Cog Island?
Karg Island.
Karg.
Yeah. So are we going to try to take Karg Island with the 82nd Airborne and Marines? Yeah. 82nd Airborne being deployed. Are we going to have an amphibious invasion of Marines and then airdrop a bunch of 82nd guys on Karg Island and control that 8-mile strip of fuel refineries and grab Iran by the nuts? The Iranians are prepared for that as well. So is it regime change? Is it to do with their nuclear program, WMD? Is it to liberate the Kurds and ethnic minorities such as the Azeris and the Baluch? None of that is the objective. As far as the Israelis are concerned, who are really running the show here with U.S. weapons and U.S. military power, the objective is to break Iran. It's not to replace the IRGC with some liberal, Western-minded Pahlavi, and turn the country back into
the people are kind of Western, though, right?
Persians are interesting, man. I mean, they're incredibly sophisticated. Yeah. Despite having lived under the yoke of a theocratic, autocratic regime for the last 40 years, you can't take away generations of education, sophistication, thousands of years of history, thousands of years of shared and common identity, in spite of those ethnic minorities like the Kurds, the Baluch, and the Azeris. The Persians are one people, and so a big part of the Persian history is when the Persians lost one of their wars to the Arabs. I think it would have been the Sassanids, and Islam was foisted upon them. The way that the Persians look at this is a tragedy. It is a fortunate tragedy in that it was a tragedy that they lost that war, but it gave to their culture what they consider the beauty of Shia Islam. And so it was kind of a fortunate fall, a Felix culpa. Yeah. And that's a big part of the Persian identity. So the Israelis, as far as they're concerned in prosecuting this war, are not looking to replace the Iranians with a friendly regime. Would that be nice and helpful and useful for them? Yes, it would, but it's just not going to happen, and they realize that reality on the ground. So what they want is Iran to be broken. They want it to be fractured, shattered, chaotic. They want it to be like Libya. Libya has not been right since 2011. It's fucked. It's ruled by a bunch of warlords. You have a slave trade going on. ISIS is making huge inroads in Libya. That's what the Israelis want for Iran. So when Americans are puzzled and scratching their heads saying, what are we trying to do over there? What are we trying to do? Exactly what we're doing right now. We're trying to break the country. Unfortunately, I think in this war of attrition, well, it could be fortunate depending on your thing, but unfortunately for those Americans who are for this war, I don't think that we're going to achieve that objective. I think that the IRGC is going to be able to outlast us. They will be crippled and they'll be fucked up after this, but I think they'll be able to lick their wounds and patch themselves back up. And we'll have an even more hardline government in that country than we did before. The one thing I can't speak to is the extent to which their nuclear capability has been destroyed by not just this, but also the June war of 2025.
Yeah. Well, okay, so interesting. So what do you think about people like me who are just kind of ignorant to it?
I don't think you're that ignorant. I mean, I think you follow all of the available news.
Well, I try to, but I'm also just like I'm pretty staunchly just like I trust Trump to do what's best for us in this, and I don't really care what everybody else gets out of it. You know, I assume that he did this for a reason. He has some sort of objective, be it breaking them or he's just helping Israel out or whatever. And that he's been pretty good on foreign policy.
What could be a real trap for people who are genuinely America first minded? Not only the depletion of America's stockpiles, which are needed when facing an actual rival. So America is a hegemon, but we're a subducting hegemon. The rising power is China. There's something in international relations called the Thucydides trap. In ancient Greece, you had Sparta, who was always the military power, but they were subducting. Their economy had started to slide. They had spread themselves too thin. Their empire was too big, and the rising power was Athens. And the Thucydides trap suggests that when you have a subducting hegemon and a rising power challenging them, they're inevitably going to go to war, and it's almost always proven true. So, China is actually, the one that America first types. I'm not saying I personally, but if people are really concerned with America hegemony, American greatness, the American empire, they should be looking at China. And so we're using all these very expensive standoff weapons, cruise missiles, and advanced aircraft like stealth F-35 multi-role bombers and shit like that. Where are those stockpiles going to be when it actually comes to facing off with somebody who can truly put up a symmetric military contest like the Chinese? Yeah. So there's that.
Well, okay. Well, real quick. Yeah. I've heard theory that this whole thing, the reason we're involved, has nothing to do with Israel, and we are trying to weaken China. Do you buy into that?
The only way this is weakening the Chinese is in terms of energy. They get a huge amount of their energy through the Strait of Hormuz and from Iran directly, as you know, be it either LNG or refined oil products, refined petroleum products. But the Chinese have huge strategic reserves. They too have been planning for this for quite a while. And
they are also old.
Yeah, but they've insulated themselves for this exact event. They've been planning for it for quite a while. And there is the bear came over the mountain dilemma, which is, when the Soviet Union went into Afghanistan, they said, hey, we're going to crush these, mujahideen, these tiny little fighters, and reinstall a Soviet communist in Kabul. That war led to the dissolution of the Soviet Union, and they were, fighting a flea. It was a big organized army with attack helicopters and tanks and regular infantry units. They got fucked up by a bunch of guys in plastic sandals and turbans. You know what I'm saying? They got fucked up. It led to the dissolution of the Soviet Empire, the Soviet Union. And I think that America, and for those who are America first-minded and really patriotic, they shouldn't overlook the bear came over the mountain dilemma. And could this war deplete or even blacken the eye of America so badly that we're ineffective when it comes to facing off against an actual rival like the Chinese?
Yeah. Okay. What do you think?
I think in those respects, and again, I'm not weighing in as an America first person or whatever. I'm not those things. I'm just kind of buying the ticket, taking the ride, and passively observing.
You're like me.
Yeah. But I think America is going to come out for the worse on
you
this,
do.
actually.
You
yeah,
do.
I think we're going to inflict a lot of pain upon the Iranians, but the IRGC is entrenched down to the level of the non-commissioned officers. That means your fucking IRGC drill sergeant has been trained and prepared for continuity of policy and continuity of government. So you can't cut the head off of this Hydra. And yeah, we're going to fuck them up. They're going to be crippled. They're going to be licking their wounds. But I think it's America who's going to come limping away from this conflict. And I could be totally wrong.
Are you a optimistic personality or a pessimistic personality?
I'd say that I'm practical.
I think that leans into pessimistic.
Most times. Yeah, most times. And I don't seek silver linings that aren't there.
Yeah, I'm somewhat of I'm in that too, practical, but I lean more to the optimistic side, so maybe that's a big difference. It's interesting to think about though, right?
Yeah.
I didn't think about that, so thank you for giving me that view of the bear over the mountain. Is that what you said?
Yeah,
bear over the mountain?
Yeah.
I like that. That's a good way to go. All right, Tom. Well, thank you. For anybody who ever doubted that I couldn't have an interesting conversation on this podcast, fuck you.
It was great, man.
I just
enjoyed
need
myself.
people like Tom to come.
We'll have to do it again. I had a great time.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on, and it's been great reconnecting with you.
Likewise, buddy.
Yeah, really fun.
All right.
All right, thank you. Oh, wait, is there, real quick before we go, plug your website one more time.
So you can find my personal writing and my colleagues' writing at militantwire.com. If you go to the About tab and scroll down to people, I'm 3 down. I am the wannabe wonk. There's a profile pic of like a Maxim machine gun, black on white, the wannabe wonk. And I write about anarchists, Nazis, revolutionary communists, and occasionally I write about things that are going on in the Middle East. But my colleagues, between all of us, we write about the whole gamut of terrorism. And I think we're a pretty clean and pure publication because we don't have any outside money coming in. And we all have kind of a singular sense of mission.
Awesome, cool. And like and subscribe, follow Tom on it's Substack, right?
Yeah, hosted on Substack. Yep.
Yeah, on Substack, and follow me on YouTube or Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Thanks, bud.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Tom.
Take it
Bye.
easy.